Good evening, hello and welcome to Tacks. I'm Anusha Soni. The crisis in the Taiwan Strait is only escalating with the Chinese dragon breathing fire. After the U.S. House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi visit to Taiwan, it's Xi's turn, and he has not just heightened the war rhetoric, but has taken it many steps further. The Chinese have announced joint air and sea drills near Taiwan, along with test launches of conventional missiles in the East Sea of the country. China fired ballistic missiles, deployed fighter jets and warships as it held its largest ever military exercises around the island nation. In the midst of this brewing crisis, there's a stunning claim by the neighbor country Japan. Japanese defense minister says that 5 ballistic missiles launched by the Chinese military have fallen into Japan's exclusive economic zone. They call it a violation. With this move, the Chinese have made it clear that US or Taiwan can't get away if they cross the red line drawn by Beijing. How grave would be the consequences, and to what extent? How would the US respond? Our top focus tonight, but first up, a special report.
Live-fire missile drills. Choppers and jets deployed. Long-range rockets launched. A day after Nancy Pelosi's Taiwan visit, the dragon is breathing fire. China is holding its largest ever military exercise in the seas around Taiwan. The exercises are taking place in multiple zones around Taiwan. Some are just within 20 kilometers of the island. In the border island of Pingtang, Chinese military choppers were seen flying past. China has deployed more than 100 fighter jets, bombers and other warplanes in the airspace of Taiwan. According to Taipei's defense ministry, China fired multiple ballistic missiles into waters around Taiwan. Taiwan has in turn moved howitzers and mortars close to areas where PLA is carrying out drills. Beijing has defended the drills as necessary and blamed the US for the escalation.
We are left with no choice but to take resolute measures to uphold our sovereignty and territorial integrity. And will this become a new normal? It hinges on the action of the US side and the Taiwan independence forces.
Despite China's fury, Nancy Pelosi's extraordinary stopover in Taiwan was the first high-level visit by a US official in 25 years. But by pledging support to Taiwan's democracy, a shadow has been cast on Washington's One China policy.
America stands with Taiwan. I think that whatever China was going to do, they will do in their own good time.
In a major escalation, Japan claimed 5 ballistic missiles launched by China's military landed inside Japan's exclusive economic zone for the very first time. Japan has launched a protest, and at least a dozen Japanese and US F-15 fighter jets have taken off from Okinawa. So given the backlash that we're witnessing from China, has Pelosi's visit caused more harm than good?
Getting you all the updates, joining us on the broadcast is CNN's Will Ripley. He's joining us live from Taipei. Thank you, Will, for speaking to us and joining us on the broadcast. My first question to you is about the Chinese aggression. China is mounting offensive post Nancy Pelosi's visit. But is the threat to Taiwan real or rhetorical? Is it just posturing, or we could actually see this war rhetoric actually translating into reality on the ground?
Well, it depends on what you would consider actual. I mean, launching missiles over Taiwan and splashing down in the waters off of Japan is certainly at least a reminder of the actual threat that Taiwan has faced for decades. I mean, Chinese missiles are always pointed at this island. We've always known they could arrive here in a matter of minutes. China is simply demonstrating it in a way, at a scale that we have not seen before. And the provocations are dialed up, and they're using Nancy Pelosi's visit as an excuse to cross the median line of the Taiwan Strait now, dozens of times, to fire these ballistic missiles for the first time in this trajectory, and then to conduct military exercises that are so close to Taiwan and, encircling the island. None of these things have happened before, and they're all happening right now. And China is using the Nancy Pelosi visit as the reason why they're doing it. So I thought the question you raised at the beginning is a good one. Did the visit do more harm than good? And I think we won't know the answer to that until we see how this all plays out.
Yeah. Going forward, how critical are the next 72 hours? As you pointed out, the escalation that we are seeing on the ground with the missiles being pointed. We have also seen a sort of statement that came from the Japanese side where they said that there were missiles that entered their economic zones, which were under the Japanese. How the next 72 hours are going to be is very, very critical for that regional security and stability.
Well, clearly, these military drills, these live-fire drills are taking place in these 6 locations near Taiwan. And so for the next 72 hours through the weekend, essentially, they're going to have to reroute flights, either Japan or the Philippines flight routes, because of some flight routes are not going to work right now because they'd have to fly over the drill zone. You also have the potential for collateral damage if people were to get into one of these military drill zones. And there, until these drills are over and until the temperature dials back down, we don't know what's going to happen because, as you said, there's a lot more military hardware that's actively engaging right now. But look, I think the bigger question is we need to watch over the next 12 months, 24 months. I mean, we know U.S. intelligence certainly believes, and I think a lot of analysts would agree, that China is working towards getting its military at a point where they feel comfortable that they could just take Taiwan. And a lot of analysts say if Xi Jinping felt that he could take Taiwan very quickly and painlessly, not a Ukraine scenario, but faster, that he would have already done it. And he would like to do it while he's in power. So if that is the case, then Taiwan certainly has a lot on its plate in terms of training its defense, its own defensive forces, and also continuing to have allies like Nancy Pelosi speaking on their behalf at democracies in legislatures around the world, because it's going to require help if Taiwan is going to survive an attack by mainland China someday.
Well, that leads me to another question. And as you're tracking all the details from Taipei, how prepared is Taiwan with this threat looking imminent right into their face? And as you said, not just 72 hours, the next 12 to 24 months are going to be very, very critical. How prepared are they?
Well, look, I mean, Taiwan has one might argue, a bit of an outdated military structure. It still has a lot of old school, big budget weapon systems that, frankly, could be destroyed in a matter of hours if they came under attack, a heavy attack, from China. Yeah. Even the most advanced fighter jets, the F-16Vs that Taiwan has in their fleet now, are no match for the Chinese fighter jets that they are flying now into the Taiwan Strait. In fact, 22 more, we just got word, crossed over the median line of the Taiwan Strait this evening, or earlier today as well. So in a direct military type of scenario, the best thing that Taiwan could probably hope for is to be able to fend them off just long enough for reinforcements to arrive. And this is not going to be a situation where you can just ship weapons into Taiwan like they're doing to Ukraine, because Taiwan is an island. And if China had set up some sort of a blockade, basically this would involve other nations having to commit resources, in a Pacific, combat that we have not seen in decades. Yes. And except now we're in a world with lots of nuclear weapons. And China relies on artificial intelligence in many cases to make some of these decisions, because they don't have the experience, the long-term experience within their ranks of generals that they have in the United States, where they rely on humans to make the calls. It's a scary scenario any way you look at it, so one can only hope that the tensions dial down and that they find some sort of a diplomatic way out of all of this.
Yes. My last question to you is about the economic concerns. There are various economic consequences which Chinese warned against, and there's a lot of action that they have taken against. How much are the Chinese businesses affected in the next few days, other than this, brewing military conflict? The consequences, the economic consequences for Taiwan could be very, very real and damaging.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't know that Taiwan relies on exports to China for a huge portion of its economy. I mean, China is Taiwan's top export partner, and it makes sense. Yeah. It's 100 miles across the Taiwan Strait to mainland China. They speak the same language up until 70 plus years ago, they shared a heritage. They share so many things. They have so many things in common, and yet unfortunately they have two governmental systems that are so drastically different that's what sets up this dynamic. And so China's now banning the imports of a growing list of items from Taiwan. That could certainly hurt the economy here. And yes, so there's going to be economic collateral damage, not to mention any potential military and diplomatic damage as well.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the broadcast. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us. Well, joining us on the broadcast is also our eminent panel. Brian Heo, he's the editor of New Blue magazine, is joining us on the broadcast. We also have Mr. James M. Dorsey. He's a senior fellow at S. Rajaratnam School at International Studies at the NTU University. And also we have Mr. Sushant Sareen. He's a senior fellow at the ORF and also a strategic affairs expert. Mr. Ashok Sajnar, who's a former diplomat, is also joining us on the broadcast. And Raymond Vickery is also with us on the show, getting us all the details. I want to take in a quick word. Thank you everyone for joining us on the show. And Brian, coming to you first and taking in a perspective from you, as my colleague Will Ripley was pointing out from Taipei, that the situation is very, very tense and the next few months and days are going to be very critical into what kind of action the Chinese actually take. Will this war rhetoric actually turn into a reality and into a kind of escalation that the Pacific region has not really seen?
I'd actually offer a word of caution there, because the mood is actually fairly calm in terms of the past 48 hours. There's been much more notice of the Pelosi visit, but while the world was discussing this for weeks and weeks, it was actually until then that Taiwanese seemed to realize that this was taking place. And so Taiwan's faced military drills in the past and military threats from China for literally decades. And so right now, I actually don't see too much panic. I mean, we are on day one of these drills. We don't know what will occur. There might be more escalation. And I also do think for this kind of thing, it takes time for images and video to filter through the news and social media to people. But I think we're going to have to see. And I think the jury's still out if people will actually panic. I don't see that happening at present. In terms of Chinese action, I think that jury is also still out. The ball is often in their court, and I think that's the case with this too.
All right, so you think that there's no case for a panic right now. James, I'm coming to you. Xi Jinping has responded very sharply after Nancy Pelosi's visit. The sort of aggression that the Japanese have reported is also very worrisome for that entire region. How do you see this really progressing in the next 72 hours? Because that's going to be very, very critical.
Well, I think that fundamentally neither China nor the United States wants an armed confrontation, at least not at this point. I think the problem is that what you've seen is, or let me put it differently, Pelosi's visit to Taiwan was an accident waiting to happen. In a situation in which you have increased big power rivalry and a hardening position on the part of the political elites, both in the United States and in China, as well as in terms of public opinion. The problem you're going to have going forward is that the degree of confrontation, or if you wish, of showmanship in the around Taiwan that is now being established with these Chinese exercises is something that we're probably going to see more permanently. For example, these kind of exercises not being a one-off event, but potentially an annual event. The other thing, of course, is that the economic sanctions that my colleague mentioned that the Chinese are already imposing, those are sanctions that are going to last much longer than the next 72 hours. So the question is going to be managing increased tension and increased showmanship up until the point where presumably the Chinese would want to make their claim of Taiwan being part of China a realistic thing, rather than right now a notional claim.
All right. I think that's also in line with what Will was also pointing out. And he was saying that the next 12 to 24 months are going to be very critical, keeping in mind that does China make this a more aggressive exercise to actually start a conflict that we have not seen earlier. So, Shant, I'm coming to you. 2 points that James mentioned. This was an accident waiting to happen, and we're talking about the visit of Nancy Pelosi. And some kind of permanent annual event where the Chinese military or their maritime might is at display, threatening Taiwan, looking at an eventual takeover of the country. Is that a possibility you consider?
Well, that's a possibility you cannot ignore. I think that's a very real possibility. But have the Chinese factored in and gamed all the consequences of such a move. Because clearly there will be consequences, and not just military. There'll be economic and political and diplomatic consequences. A lot of it, of course, will depend upon how much the Taiwanese are willing to stand up for their independence, and how much the rest of the world is willing to put its money where its mouth is. So a lot of it will depend upon that. The other part of it is, look, I don't necessarily agree with the thing that Pelosi's visit was an accident waiting to happen. I think the tensions have been mounting for a fair bit of time. And my own sense is that it was important for the Americans to show that they are not going to be a pushover for the kind of aggressive moves that the Chinese have been making. For example, before the Ukraine war started, the Chinese were trying to intimidate the Taiwanese by constantly, sending their aircraft over, constantly, pressing other pressure points of the Taiwanese. And now, of course, that whole situation has got escalated to a very dangerous level. But will the Chinese want to push the envelope further and actually risk an all-out confrontation at this point in time with all the economic consequences, which even if the rest of the world was to, behave like they behaved in Afghanistan, pretend that the place does not exist and move on, can the Chinese, afford that kind of a confrontation even with Taiwan, with all the disruptions that begin? Look, the economic disruptions are not just going to affect Taiwan. They're also going to affect China.
Okay.
And yes, so it kind of works both ways. But yes, we are not in a very comfortable position. And this pressure is only going to stay and going to increase going forward, unless somebody, is able to make the Chinese back off. And I don't know if anybody is ready to do that just yet.
Mr. Ashok Sajanar, I'm coming to you. When the visit of Nancy Pelosi was being talked about, there was much discussion and the controversy around it, and the Joe Biden administration also tried to maintain a certain degree of arm's distance. However, that visit she went ahead with the visit. The U.S. must have calculated the ramifications of it, what China is doing, maybe the degree to which you can't precisely guess, but the response from the Chinese was inevitable. The U.S. would have calculated it. And in the days to come, how do you see an administration like the Biden administration responding to what is happening in Taiwan Strait?
Anusha, there was no way that the United States could have backed down from this visit once discussions were taking place on it. Because, that would have been such a huge loss of face, and that would have really been seen to be, committing harakiri, even as far as the whole notion of Indo-Pacific is concerned, the whole notion of the Quad is concerned, in terms of the South China Sea maintaining, rule of law and freedom of navigation, freedom of overflights, etc. All that would have come crashing down, because if a power cannot even send one of its senior representatives to a country because of threats that are verbal threats that are sent out to it, then of course, it will not be able to withstand any of the, when push comes to shove, it will really not be able to handle these things. So there was no way that the US could have resiled on the visit not taking place. That having been said, I think the United States and the world at large, knows and believes that this is no time that Xi Jinping will go to war. There is no way that he can go to war, because in November, you are going to have the Congress of the Communist Party of China, at which very significant decisions are to be made. The third term of Xi Jinping, which as president, which will come up next year, that is going to be decided at this Congress. So he wants to give this image of a powerful person, of a strong man who's in control of things. And if he were to sort of, go to war, the end of which, the result of which is uncertain, there is no way that he will go for it. So fine muscle flexing, he's been doing that. China has been doing that for quite some time. Over the last several months, we have seen that. So, he might push this envelope a little further without crossing really the red line of sort of, going into any sort of kinetic conflict or confrontation.
Yeah.
But I think beyond that, it is not going to be anything more than that I can see. Of course, as far as economic sanctions are concerned, they have been used by many countries at many times. It is a two-way street. It works both ways.
Yes.
So, if it is going to hurt Taiwan, it'll hurt China. There are huge investments that Taiwan has made in China. Investments are moving out, they come out. And the economic situation in China is not pretty. The zero COVID policy is backfiring as far as Xi Jinping is concerned. And it is seen to be his project. His project also as far as the restrictions on technology, restrictions on education, the manner in which the real estate sector has been handled there, and the economic prosperity levels are coming down. So, this is all a matter of worry and going into this uncharted territory of a conflict, of a war, the end of which is uncertain. Definitely Xi Jinping is not going to go through it. So maybe some more of economic sanctions, a little more of muscle flexing, sending out a message to the ASEAN countries and to some of the others. Like in the case even of India, they have said one China policy is absolutely sacrosanct and so on and so forth. But I think when it talks about China, talks about its own territorial integrity, etc., I think it is the worst violator of territorial integrity.
And that is a view that has been shared by many experts in various countries. Raymond Vickery, I'm coming to you. Taking that point forward from Mr. Sajna, do you agree that China at this point in time, due to various global and domestic reasons, cannot afford a full-fledged direct military confrontation? And if no, then will it be ready for this kind of confrontation in the next 12 to 24 months? Because as my colleague from CNN was pointing out, we need to see whether this is just a one-time posturing that China is doing by pointing missiles, or this would rather become more consistent over the next few months and years.
Well, thanks for having me. I think it's absolutely certain that this is a very difficult and dangerous time, not only for the United States, but India and the world. What is at stake here really is the rule of law that's enshrined in the UN Charter, that you don't use force in order to try to get somebody else's territory. India has a great stake in this. China claims Arunachal Pradesh, has said that visits by Indian officials to Arunachal Pradesh can be a provocation. In Kashmir, they have recognized or are using that territory in conjunction with Pakistan for their Belt and Road. So it's a very widespread principle here that is at stake. Now, coming to the commercial part of it, I would point out that China has a lot at stake here. Chinese exports to the United States have been the foundation of its prosperity. So they have to think twice before they're going to start a war and cut off the export market, which has made them rich. And I would point out that all of this is really tied to what Putin is doing in Ukraine. I have no doubt that Xi is looking at what is happening in Ukraine and seeing if Putin can get away with this, the use of force, the contravention of international law, then maybe Xi can get away with it, not only in regard to Taiwan, but the South China Sea, Arunachal Pradesh, and so forth. So it's a time to wage peace, and the United States and India need to stand together on all fronts, including the commercial front, in order to be able to wage peace and convince Xi that he shouldn't be another Putin and invade his neighbors and try to get his way by the use of force.
Okay. James Dorsey, I'm coming to you. How do you see what Raymond is pointing out? He's saying that perhaps what has happened in Ukraine, what Putin has done, has served an example for Xi Jinping. And while he might be constrained by a post-COVID economy, the troubles of getting once again the economy back on track and ensuring that people have jobs and their life is stable, to a larger Chinese expansionist policies that they've been talking about, whether it's here along the LAC in Arunachal Pradesh or multiple other fronts that the Chinese have opened.
There are 2 points I'd like to make. I agree with much that has been said. I think there's, in terms of the timing of a potential armed conflict, also another point. While the Chinese have made incredible strides in upgrading and advancing their military is not yet on par with the United States. And that's one thing that Xi Jinping will take into account. The second thing he needs to take into account, and certainly will, is the United States is a battle-hardened military. The Chinese have yet to prove themselves on the battlefield, irrespective of what they look like on paper in terms of their personnel and equipment. The other point I'd like to make is that Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, other world leaders like Viktor Orban are leaders who think in terms of civilizational borders, not national borders. And so they constitute, by definition, challenges to international law and the rule of law under which you have nation states with sovereignty that is inviolable. And I think that's part of the problem here. And it becomes then, as we've clearly seen with Ukraine, a question of when rather than if leaders like that decide that it's time to take military action.
James, but to augment my question, how do you see the United States really responding to what Chinese are doing? I mean, they went ahead with Nancy Pelosi's visit. That has happened. They clearly expected that Beijing is going to respond. The manner, tone and tenor, of course, you can't predict precisely. But is the U.S. prepared for this sort of a response coming in from the Chinese?
Well, first of all, I think that we've got to understand what we mean by the U.S. here. If we take it at face value, by design or by default, you've had the Pentagon saying that they do not like the visit. You've had Pelosi saying, I'm going ahead with the visit. And you've had the White House essentially initially practicing strategic ambiguity, not saying anything, and now bending over backwards to emphasize that the United States does not support Taiwanese independence and remains adherent to the one China policy. Despite, of course, calls within the United States as well as Chinese suspicions that the Americans are hollowing out that policy. I think that the Americans at this point, depending on how far the Chinese go, may or may not have to respond by, for example, by some sort of maritime presence in the region to emphasize their commitment to maintaining free maritime navigation. But I don't think that I think in both the Chinese and the American cases, they'll both be very cautious and potentially walk to the brink, but they don't want to go across that red line.
Brinkmanship, or more than that, that is the million-dollar question, and we'll see in the next few days how this really transpires. Brian Heo, James M. Dorsey, Sushant Sareen, Mr. Ashok Sajana, Raymond Vikri. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the broadcast. And these developments are worrying for the entire world, especially for the ASEAN countries. India has not issued a statement so far, but all eyes on what happens in the Taiwanese Strait. Well, moving on, and here's another top story of the day. And this is about the National Herald case. You remember what happened yesterday. All hell broke loose yesterday when the National Herald office, the 4th floor, was sealed by the Enforcement Directorate. The Congress party has called the move an open threat and an intimidation tactic by the BJP. Congress leader Rahul Gandhi has openly dared the government, saying he is not scared of anyone and he has done nothing wrong. The case traces its origin to a complaint by Dr. Subramaniam Swamy. That was about 7 years ago. This is a case that has come to haunt the first family of the Congress party, Rahul Gandhi and Mrs. Sonia Gandhi. The National Herald newspaper is in the limelight because allegedly its assets and proceeds have been illegally laundered. The matter is sub judice, investigation is underway, but as we track the story with each raid, with each passing day, with each step of the investigating agency, this continues to cause a political battle between the BJP and the Congress. A special report.
ये पूरा इंटिमिडेशन का अटेम्प्ट है। ये सोचते हैं कि थोड़ा सा मतलब प्रेशर डाल के हमें चुप कर देंगे, मतलब नहीं होने वाले।
Rahul Gandhi coming out all guns blazing after the Enforcement Directorate temporarily sealed the office of Young Indian. He slammed the Prime Minister for what he called pressure tactics to silence voices of the opposition by using central agencies.
और मोदी से तो मैं मतलब बिल्कुल नहीं सर, लगातार ये बात और लगाएं और बैरिकेडिंग करें।
और सर आपको जिस तरह से कल AICC मुख्यालय को भी बैरिकेड किया गया है,
को बैरिकेड नहीं करा जाता।
While Rahul Gandhi fumed at the centre, the Enforcement Directorate resumed its raids at Young Indian after senior party leader Mallikarjun Kharge turned up at Herald House.
जो ईडी का प्रोसीजर है वो कर रहे हैं और हम ज़्यादा इस पे टिप्पणी इसलिए नहीं करना चाहते हैं। ये तो एक पॉलिटिकल वेंडेटा की बात है।
Rahul and Sonia Gandhi are the majority shareholders in Young Indian. Both of them have been questioned multiple times by the Enforcement Directorate over allegations of money laundering. The Congress staged massive protests every time the Gandhis were summoned for questioning.
300 policemen are sent to the Congress President's house. 300 policemen are sent to the former Congress President's house. Some 200 policemen have surrounded the AICC office. What is all this? Are we at war with each other?
And now they're planning to घेराव the Prime Minister's residence and hold a pan-India agitation on the 5th of August. But the BJP claims that the Congress's sole agenda is to save the Gandhis.
अगर कुछ किया नहीं है तो इतना डर क्यों है कांग्रेस के कार्यकर्ताओं में, कांग्रेस के बड़े नेताओं में, और खास करके सबका एक ही कवायद है, सबकी कवायद है कि किस प्रकार से एक ही परिवार के लिए हम आंदोलन करें, एक परिवार को कैसे बचाया जाए।
So why is the Congress objecting to a routine part of the investigation? Is it digging itself into a bigger hole?
Well, joining us on the broadcast are our guests from the Congress and the BJP. We are expecting Shazia Almi from the BJP to join us in a few minutes from now. Dr. Shama Mohammed of the Congress Party, who's the national spokesperson, is joining us on the show. Good evening, Shama. Thank you so much for speaking to us. There were multiple statements that came from various BJP leaders today, and most of them arguing that the Congress Party is only trying to save the first family and they are not ready to face the due process of law. Please answer those allegations.
If we were not ready to face the due process of law, when Rahul ji was questioned for 5 days and 50 hours, he was called for questioning. He never said no, he never protested, he went there for questioning. Mrs. Sonia Gandhi was called for questioning. She went there, and in fact, when they asked her to leave, she said, listen, you can continue to question me. I'm ready to answer all your questions if you want to continue again further today. So this is all a reason by the present dispensation, the government, to divert from the most important issue today is price rise, is unemployment, is the 5% GST on your pulses, dal, wheat, rice, hospitals, you know, what all we have heard, various things, the GST has gone up, pencils, sharpeners, I can go on with it. So they don't want us to protest. And they want to keep on bringing about this ED thing. The ED questioning is happening on one side. Nobody said, you know, only thing we ask on that particular ED questioning is that don't harass people, because there are many in the government itself who should be questioned by the ED, like Himanta Biswa Sarma, Subindu Adhikari, Narayan Rane. They were all questioned before they joined the party, but once they join the party, they get cleansed as if they've been put into the Ganga. So why is it? There was recently an FIR also against Himanta Biswa Sarma by an MLA from Jharkhand. Okay. So when there are serious allegations against the BJP leaders, I fail to understand why the ED is not let loose on them. And you know, we also know that there were some Shiv Sena leaders, they were questioning. Sarnaik. So why is the questioning on him stopped? Because he's now in the part of Eknath Shinde.
Okay.
So that is the thing,
Okay.
Pratap
Let me bring in Shazia also into this discussion. Shazia, the argument that Shama Mohammed is making is that if the Congress party was trying to evade the due process of law, you wouldn't have Mrs. Sonia Gandhi and Mr. Rahul Gandhi going for each round of questioning each time the Enforcement Directorate has called them. They have taken the legal recourse, they are cooperating with the investigation, but this is an attempt by the BJP only to divert the attention from the real issues. How correct is that?
First of all, I don't see the connection. I mean, I don't see the connection between this and that.
Yeah.
So I don't know what is the connection between the two, between the two premises that were made by my friend Shama. So there are very basic questions, and this is exactly what ED has been asking. ED and the whole inquiry has been mandated now by the Supreme Court, as we all know. ED is responsible to the judiciary. And we know that both Sonia Gandhi and Rahul Gandhi, another member of the first family of Congress, Robert Vadra ji, they all have been on bail. And there are real reasons why they are on bail. So one thing is you can make a case about witch hunting and political subjugation, so to speak. The other case is very, very real. The other premise is based on hard facts, is based on money trail, money laundering, is based on a very which can become actually a huge case study in Harvard Business School as to how 15 lakhs can actually yield 2,000 crores. Is based on a real building and the shares and AGL, the company, and a lot of transactions that have taken place and are being attributed to the decisions of which were having been
Shazia,
made by
to
late
add to the
Motilal
point,
Vora.
and then I'll go to Shama as well.
Yes.
She also made another point, and she said that there were various leaders who were, when in the Congress party or when they were in the opposition camps, they were being probed by the Enforcement Directorate. But the moment they shifted camps, they moved to the BJP, somewhat the investigation stopped.
I mean, a lot of people also say that and blame the BJP that there was so much talk about action having to be taken against Robert Vadra, but nothing really happened. So a lot of people say that. I mean, I can't speak for the ED because I do not work with the ED. I can only speak for my party. And maybe because Congress is so used to using all the agencies for its own advantage. Now, if you do corruption, people will come after you. There would be nobody in this government, nobody is going to be there. It won't be like I scratch your back, you scratch my back. As it used to happen.
Okay.
If you've been there, nobody's going to save you.
Let me take those questions.
So if you hadn't indulged in all of these, the ED would not have come after you. But definitely there is nothing transactional, and there are no favors to curry as they would have done with some other party or in some other coalition arrangement.
Dr. Shama Mohammed,
it's a case.
The question there's a direct question that Shazia is asking.
And they're very basic questions here.
I'm going to address them. I'm going to address them. I'm going to address them to Dr. Shama Mohammed. Dr. Shama Mohammed, while politically it might be a very fancy argument to make that this is political witch hunt and vendetta and you're trying to deflect from the main issues, the argument of the BJP is that there is something fishy and that is why this investigation is going on for so long, and you want to raise the issue of inflation and GST, you're more than welcome to do it, but there is no diversionary tactic. This is a mere argument without any substance.
Okay, so for example, this case is 10 years old. They suddenly wake up. There is a section, Young India is a Section 25 company where money laundering can never happen because, the directors, the shareholders cannot get any dividends from this country. And we have also given our tax books, whatever it is there, is all given. It's there in the court right now because the allegation is an income tax issue, right? The allegation. But not prevention of money, it doesn't come under Prevention of Money Laundering Act. So that itself says one thing. Number two, if it is a problem with what she's saying is ED and everything, like I mentioned, we were ready for questioning Mrs. Gandhi as well as they are even questioning Mallikarjun Kharge ji. But the issue is when I went to my office yesterday in the evening, why is the Delhi police outside and not letting us in? I fail to understand. Like she said, what is the connection? I fail to understand what is the connection of ED questioning and me getting into my karyalaya, my office. It's my right. And when we are out to protest in a peaceful manner, even the other time when we said we are going to walk from the parliamentarian said from the parliament to Vijay Chowk, they did not allow them. The police came and picked them up. I don't understand that in a peaceful manner, in a democracy, can't we protest? Now, the other thing she says is allegation is one. But what is the truth is when you're convicted. Now, before 2000... No, let me finish. You have to let me finish my point. Before 2014, we had a number of allegations. They alleged about coal scam. They said 2G. And we came to know that there was no scam, the Supreme Court said in 2G. There was no conviction in terms of the coal thing with us, but some bureaucrats were convicted. Now, the only person I know in politics who has been convicted of corruption in 2011 is Yediyurappa, and he's from the Bharatiya Janata Party. So they just cannot point fingers and say allegations. Allegations are proven when you have evidence and you're convicted. And the person convicted is Yediyurappa. So where is corruption in us? We are ready for questioning. And I'm telling you why is the
one thing I want to point out. One thing I want to point out, Shama, that the Supreme Court at no point, the Supreme Court at no point said that there was no coal scam or there was no 2G scam. You're right that there were no convictions that happened at the trial court. You're right about that. But the fact that in principle, the allegations were wrong. The allegations were wrong that was said by the Supreme Court.
Can I come in, please?
Yes, Shazia, I'll come to you. Let her make a brief point and I'll come to you.
In terms of I want to finish my point.
Finish your point. Finish your point.
In terms of 2G, they said in terms of 2G, no, let me finish my point. In terms of 2G, I want to correct the anchor.
I'm coming to your 2G
point. In terms of 2G, the Supreme Court said, there is no scam. I didn't talk about coal. I said our politicians were not convicted. It was the bureaucrats. So you can't say something else.
Okay, let Shazia respond now. Let Shazia respond. Shazia, go ahead.
Yeah. So I will go point after. So the very fact that my learned friend Shama mentions 2G is testimony to the fact that the Supreme Court will be unbiased. Just now she mentioned the Supreme Court said that there was indeed nothing to say that there was any wrongdoing. It was the same enforcement directorate. It was under the same government, which is my party, which is NDA. So this goes on to say, this is the same Supreme Court, same ED. It goes on to say that nothing
It was during our time, my dear.
No, our time, because you were always giving laddus and it was our time. The verdict just came, my dear friend.
It was just as soon as you came in. It's just as soon as you came in. The case was going on during our time.
See,
I know the facts of this story. You can't come and lie on national television.
No.
But you have to talk about Yediyurappa, who got convicted in 2011. You never talk about that.
I don't want to be part of this.
The conviction is of your leader. Why don't you why are you... No, you have to talk about Yediyurappa. Yediyurappa, why are you diverting?
Okay, Shama, let her answer. Shama, you've made your point. Let Shazia answer. Shazia, please go ahead. Make your point. I want you to make your point.
Yeah.
There are very specific allegations that she's made against Yediyurappa, and she's also arguing there are various leaders within the BJP accused of corruption.
She can say anything to run away, but the fact is, and they're very serious facts, and the fact is that Young India paid 50 lakhs from the amount of money to AJL and to take over 99% of the shareholding of the company. So she's totally wrong, and nobody's talking about PMLA. But ED finds no trail of VRS payment to any other expenditure of 90.21 crores by AGL, as was earlier claimed by Congress leaders. Rahul Gandhi also told ED only about late Motilal Vora, and they see that he's the only one who knew about these transactions. Now, Income Tax Department in its assessment order said that there was a loan entry, and the loan entry of 90.21 crores was fixed. Now, Sonia Gandhi, being president of the party, must answer how Congress paid 90 crores to AJL. Well, how was that entry done? And you know, and it is for these reasons that the Delhi court has taken cognizance of the charges against Sonia Gandhi and Rahul Gandhi. And they were ordered for trial. And the sections, as you very well mentioned, are 120B and
Shama,
420.
I have a very simple question. You know, we've been talking about courts so much. You can respond to what Shazia said, but I also have a question. The Congress party has an illustrious number of lawyers and top legal eagles as their party members who have served in the party for many years. If this case was a complete botched up investigation with no substance or no merit, why hasn't the quashing application ever been entertained by any court of law? You could have moved an application for the quashing of the FIR or an ECIR. The courts have let the investigation really go further.
So that's what now I'm going to say. So they want to do an investigation. They are doing an investigation. No, we are cooperating. That's what I'm saying. When there's an investigation, we have given our books, whatever. She is going on talking about young India. Again, I'm going to repeat it. Debt was converted into equity. There is no wrongdoing by young India or, for that matter, AGI. So what my only issue out here is, I'm again going to
Shazia, let her respond. Shazia, let her respond. Shazia, let her respond. You've had your time.
No, you said it was way before we came to power.
Shazia, let her respond. I'm very short of time. Allow Shama to have 30 seconds.
Judgment came.
Shama, 30 seconds. Shama, 30 seconds. Please go ahead. Shama, go ahead. 30 seconds.
Yeah. So
2017.
So what happens is, what I'm trying to say here.
2017,
what I'm trying to say, you never answered about Yedurappa. You haven't answered about Yedurappa. I asked you. You are not answering. No, you changed to Young India and ED. You did
all right, Dr. Shama Mohammed and Shazia Ilmi, thank you. Thank you both of you for joining us on the broadcast. In these politically heated debate, there is a court of law. There's investigation which is actually going on. And the job of any objective and independent agency is to find out that if there is money that was laundered with, if there are people who are accountable, however high and mighty, and the law must take its process. Whether conviction or acquittal, we should know very soon. We're slipping into a very short break, but coming up after the break, these are dramatic landslides in the state of Himachal Pradesh following heavy rains. Stay tuned.